what is the Catholic understanding of Halloween or All Hallows Eve? I think there's some confusion sometimes for some people.
I think people get very carried away in thinking that it's much worse in terms of origin, much darker and much more evil in origin than it actually is. And then I think it's because there are some people who have played into that some of those who would be on the more darker arts side of things, they've played into that too. And so they've made Halloween something that it never really was. I think it's kind of a balancing act. Like historically, there have been pagan festivals that Christians have baptized. That is history.
Right.
As places and cultures have been evangelized, some of their holidays have been. Hang on a second, Duke. Could you please not do that? There's a dog in the office with us. He's just making noise.
Oh no! Now he's gonna start talking to you.
No, he won't.
I just heard a grunt.
He'll be fine. But there's historically as like evangelization has taken place, you have cultures and their festivals and their different celebrations that are then kind of baptized. And so Christian celebrations that are similar to or that carry a similar theme, but now in a Christian context are often brought into that culture. This is the truth. It's not something that is hidden. We don't pretend like this isn't, like some people say, well, Christmas was originally a pagan holiday and it was this celebration.
Yeah, that's what everybody says.
Yeah. That's sure. Christians haven't been out here pretending that they don't baptize other cultures or other traditions, but that we say this is how we're going to mark this particular day. As it happens, this is a way that we can evangelize. We can share something and say that actually this day that's important to you, it's important to us also for this reason. And now we want you to make this day important to you. It's part of evangelization, so it's part of encountering a whole culture.
Why was Christmas moved from? I think the original was in like April or March.
No, they say that so the Annunciation is in March.
Okay.
And they say that there are some scholars who will maintain a date for Christmas that is more in the springtime, but there's also good reason to believe that it in fact was a winter holiday, that it is something that historically that it took place. The birth of Christ took place in the context of what we would in the northern hemisphere call winter.
True, right. One example that I heard was that it is the shortest time in the year. So there's the littlest amount of daylight, but that's exactly when like the light came and broke through Jesus' incarnation, which makes sense to me. I'm like, that's actually kind of cool.
The calendar, the winter solstice is the shortest day of the year, and then every day after that, the light begins to grow. And they, if nothing else, the ancient world certainly understood the changing of seasons and the way that these kinds of events would happen, so that they knew that there was a time when the darkness grew longer. And they also knew there was a time when the darkness grew shorter. Yeah. So
what I'm thinking with this is in terms of how some people, like very faithful, devout people, can have like I don't know if the right word is fascination with evil, like kind of giving it too much credit or like too much attention. Like, for example, we're doing the Screwtacular right now, so I'm getting to see how some people have different like approaches to spiritual warfare and how the enemy works. And what's interesting about the Screwtacular, it is more to do with how the enemy affects you in ordinary life than it is about possessions.
So do you want to talk about the Screwtacular, or do you want to talk about Halloween?
We could talk about both, because I feel we're close to Halloween, but it's really making me think about this, the relationship that culture has with evil, or like different people on the extremes in the church world who can approach it in different ways. So then what is a proper way to approach discussions on evil? But you also don't want to like obviously negate that it exists.
Well, no, that's a whole theological statement that we could really get into. Does evil in fact exist?
Oh.
So the classic way that St. Thomas Aquinas would talk about it, and that other great theologians would say, is evil as a thing in itself does not exist. Evil is the privation of good. So evil is actually the absence of something.
Okay.
So it's not actually a thing in itself.
Oh, wow.
Even Lucifer, angel of light that rebels against God and is so cast out of heaven,
Right.
And becomes Satan and everything, is not evil in himself.
He was made to be good.
He was made to be good, right?
Yeah.
And because of that, he is separate. He has separated himself from goodness. But there would be certain pretty significant theological debate about the idea that evil exists in itself. And
right. So something as
thus
purely...
far, all theology kind of comes down on the side of no, it's the privation of good.
Yes.
The absence of something good. It's not a thing. It is the absence of a thing.
Because then wouldn't that mean that there would be something equal to God's goodness?
Correct.
Right.
Exactly.
And you can't have that because that's not.
Correct. Right.
Wow.
And this is why evil does not actually have the final victory.
No.
Because goodness actually exists. And goodness will always triumph. God's goodness, God's mercy will always have that great victory.
That's really cool.
Isn't it?
That is a really cool thing.
Yeah.
Isn't that what they say about like colors? Something like it's
white is the absence of color, and
right.
black is the presence of all colors.
Yes.
I don't know. I don't know enough about art and color and things like that. I only wear black with a little tiny white. So like there's no, for me, it's just all this darkness.
Yeah. I mean, like there was someone that I had a discussion with, and it was about a movie that we were going to watch. And she goes, "Oh, I got to make sure I pray my rosaries all day in preparation for this movie." And it was nefarious. But it was this highly like anxious, anticipatory, if I don't stay prayed up, I'm going to get possessed by watching this movie. And I've heard some people kind of have that, especially towards some different forms of media, whether it is like horrific or more thriller or more suspenseful. So what is it? Here's a Christian call to approach these kinds of things. Because on my end, I'm like, I really like Harry Potter.
Right.
But
yeah, well, there's a tendency to go to the, anything that is not explicitly Christian is therefore evil. And that doesn't really resonate. That doesn't really make much sense when we just take the step back and kind of examine it, because we know there's such a thing as natural goodness.
Right.
So a human being who's never heard the gospel before can have a natural goodness. There's such a thing as a natural virtue. And even people who are not especially religious, who don't have much in the way of a relationship with God, they can still have and possess natural virtue by God's grace, by God's goodness. They just don't realize necessarily where it comes from.
Right.
They're good, and they have the capacity to do good. And because they've learned to do good and they do it, and the more they do it, the better their lives are, that natural virtue takes deeper and deeper root for them.
Yeah.
If they are given the opportunity to encounter the gospel, to meet Jesus, that natural virtue is only going to serve them even more, because that natural virtue, now touched by God's grace, will just explode into something really good.
Right.
And I think that if we understand that that's true, then not everything is going to be explicitly Christian. There are going to be certain things that are depictions of something that happens, of the absence of good. There are some things that will be a depiction in art, in literature, in cinema, however we want to define the various and sundry performing arts, visual arts,
yes,
written arts, whatever it is that we're talking about, literary arts. I think that's the way to describe it. Whatever it is, there's going to be some stuff that actually might be kind of focused on things that are bad, focused on things that are violent and evil. For myself, for example, like I don't go in for horror movies ever. I can't stand the genre.
Me too.
And it's not because I think it's satanic or explicitly evil.
You think it's dumb?
I just don't like it. I'm not a fan. And so
yeah, I agree.
Like movies, especially movies about movies about the demonic, kind of creep me out. But part of the reason is because I know it's not just something that's meant to scare you.
Yeah.
Demons are real.
Yeah.
And so there's a healthy way to understand this, that demons are, so we don't mess around with it. Like
right.
we don't pretend like it's no big deal, like it's nothing. It is a big deal. And we must needs pay attention to this.
Oh, for sure.
These things are real.
For sure.
At the same time, those things that are real need not be a big intimidator for us. Because if we have that relationship with God, if we're walking with the Lord, then we know that whatever the darkness might be that's around us, we know who has the victory.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We know that it's Christ who has that ultimate final victory for eternity.
Right.
So what do we have to be afraid of?
That's a good point.
You know.
But this also doesn't mean, hey, go to a psychic or to
no, you should never do that.
Yeah, never do those things.
There are certain things that are explicitly like off the table, right, because they are dangerous.
Yes.
Because you're opening a door spiritually that's very dangerous. And so there's no reason to do that. Like if there's a big sign that says, do not touch high voltage, you will die. I'm not going to touch that thing.
The church
right?
has said what those things are. I'm going to be
very careful because it says don't touch, this is too dangerous.
Right.
But there are other things that like we can understand, hey, there's a safe way to experience this. There is a way to understand something, or to even like be exposed a little bit. It might be uncomfortable, but it probably won't kill you.
An example of this would be
shark diving.
Like
when you go in the cage and the sharks come up and swim next to you and everything, like you probably won't die.
Right.
But if you stick a limb outside of that cage, there's a chance you might die.
Okay, when there's Shark Week on TV.
Don't you love it?
Okay, so my feet, any part of my body cannot be dangling off the couch to this day. Like my brain goes so.
I know that land shark was a Saturday Night Live skit. It's not a real thing.
I didn't even know that was a thing. Yeah, no,
there's
I'm not
sharks that like live under your couch.
That's exactly what happens to me. I'm like, if my foot is sticking out or if my arm is sticking out, I just imagine a shark coming and grabbing my body part. And to this day, I am 33 and I still feel like this. And my limbs have to be on the couch. Nothing can. My brain just goes in that direction. Or what's worse, or like if I'm in a pool, I'm in a super deep end. I'm like, Paula, control your imagination. You're in a pool. It's fine. The way that I would just totally.
That's pretty wild.
Yes, I know.
I mean, I love it. But
I know. I have a very active imagination that needs to relax.
The idea that like you're on land.
Yes, I know.
Inside.
I know.
You're worried about a shark getting you.
Yes.
That's an interesting thing.
No, and I know it's not going to happen, but like my body gets like, I get shivers. I just need to have everything protected.
Okay.
It's a psychological thing. And
it definitely is. Yeah, no, it's that. If nothing else, it's psychological. I mean, wow.
You learned something new today.
Well, diagnosable too, I think.
It is kind of scary.
A little bit.
It is.
I think that what can happen often when we're talking about like, all right, Halloween, how do we participate? What I always tell people is instead of dressing your kids up as the scariest thing possible, like the most violent thing possible, or the creepiest thing possible, like there's nothing wrong with kids dressing up as a Disney character. There's nothing wrong with kids dressing up as their favorite movie character. There's nothing wrong with kids dressing up as their favorite sports star or something like that. Like, in fact, people put on costumes all the time for all different reasons, and it's just meant to be fun.
Right, exactly.
There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing inherently evil about that.
Right.
But if we're looking at Halloween as like spooky time, scary time, ghosts and demons and things like that, then hey, maybe we should pull back from that, because in fact, the Christian celebration of All Hallows Eve is actually all about driving away demons. It's all about invoking the saints to prepare for the great feast of All Saints, and it's about recognizing that even in the darkness, God triumphs. Good triumphs over evil.
Yeah.
Mercy triumphs over sin.
Yeah.
And so if we avoid things like, don't dress up as a devil, don't dress up as this scary thing. Avoid even like the really violent stuff. So people get really concerned about like watching horror movies,
right?
Or reading Harry Potter. But will they have the same concern about movies that are violent? Will they have the same concern about some of the humor that they do listen to?
Yeah.
In popular culture, even stuff that's like relatively benign. So if we're gonna do it, like we should just cut ourselves off completely from any kind of technology,
right,
and have no access to any of it,
right.
or we can understand there's a proper and a healthy way to engage with it that allows us to remain confident in our relationship with God
Mm-hmm.
and to have healthy and appropriate boundaries. So like that big sign that says danger, do not touch, high,
Right.
extremely high voltage. If you touch this, you will die.
Mm-hmm.
And so we therefore don't touch it. We're respecting a healthy and necessary boundary. So things like Ouija boards, tarot cards, palm readers, psychics, those are off limits to Catholics.
Oh, for sure.
Any of the different occult
Horoscopes.
practices are off limits. We cannot do it. And we can't put our faith in those things. We can't trust in those things,
Mm-hmm.
But like, okay, you just mentioned horoscopes.
Right.
Right. Well, if you're reading the newspaper and there's horoscopes there and you happen to glance at a horoscope, you didn't commit a sin
No.
by reading a horoscope. The sin is I consult my horoscope to help me determine how I should act today and the things that I ought to look for. And I believe my horoscope. That's when you're like, okay, you're falling into a sin of presumption, of pride, of seeking out counsel from someplace other than the Holy Spirit.
Right.
That's what the issue is.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that we really have that much to worry about for most of it, because most of it is done like Harry Potter. The only caution that I have really heard that makes a lot of sense to me is these are stories,
mm-hmm.
and that's all that they are. But they do use language. The spells, these are rooted in Latin. If they're not actually proper Latin, it is a real language. And so we should be very careful about the kinds of things that we're saying when it's a real language that can actually be spoken, mm-hmm. and that we know actually can affect things in the spiritual world. Mm. Right. Mm-hmm. Like when I read the prayers in Latin, they actually do things, right? Like if I use the old rite of blessing for holy water, mm-hmm. That water is actually exorcised. That salt is actually exorcised. Mm-hmm. It's really cool.
That's really cool.
I love it. I think it's awesome.
Right.
But like the thing that I said in Latin actually happens. Mm-hmm. And so if there's little spells in a Harry Potter book that are written in Latin, however flawed the conjugations or something might be, there could potentially be a real spiritual impact of those. Mm-hmm. And so we've got to be really careful that we understand the difference between a fictitious story, mm-hmm. that is made up by an author who is simply using them as a literary device to write a story, mm-hmm. And somebody who's actually encouraging the practice of witchcraft and demonology.
Right.
And the reality is, if you look at things like Harry Potter, it's not actually encouraging you to become a wizard.
No.
If anything, it's reminding you that you can't, because you're a muggle. I've read enough Harry Potter to know that that's what it's about. All right.
It's an adolescent book of trying to find yourself in the world. Yeah.
But in that case, evil. Then we also shouldn't read Tolkien. Because Tolkien has a wizard, and the wizard casts spells.
Right.
We shouldn't read C.S. Lewis and the Chronicles of Narnia, because there are spells that are spoken about. So this is where we have to say, no, it's not that this thing is evil, but hey, if as a result of this you decide that you want to become a witch or a wizard, we might have a bit more of a problem that needs to be mm-hmm. examined. Okay, let's not get into the practice of witchcraft just because of all that.
Yeah. So what would you say to somebody who says that doing something on Halloween, it's like, some people will say, oh, well, this time has been dedicated to the enemy or something. And so really kind of have to I've heard different responses to people's experience of Halloween or their approach of Halloween, where like, you can't do anything on that day, so as to not engage with evil.
Entirely the opposite. Like, if this is a day that's somehow been dedicated to evil, why in the world would we step back and say, okay, it's all yours? Mm-hmm. That's insane.
Right.
That's the opposite of anything Christian, right? Like, what is the response to evil supposed to be? That we fight with the power of good, right?
Yeah.
So far from saying we can't do anything that day.
Because it kind of, for me, when I hear that, and it kind of gives power to the enemy.
Exactly.
Rather than like, well, why am I going to put, like, it's causing fear in my own heart or other people, as if the enemy has the last say, but she doesn't.
It's one thing to say, I should protect myself. I should be on my guard.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
For sure. Like we should be on our guard about certain things.
Right.
But being on guard about dangerous things is not the same thing as hiding and letting something bad, something, that's far from God just take over.
Right.
We shouldn't cower in fear. We don't need to.
Right. One example is the Christmas tree, for example.
Mm-hmm.
How like pagans use trees, like these kinds of particular trees, to murder or sacrifice people. Am I right about that? Is that what it is? And then it had become like baptized to help explain the Trinity, or like the evergreen as the ever presence of the triune God.
I mean, I know that the Christmas tree has its origins in Germanic tribes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know exactly what they use them for. I don't know enough about it. But here's the thing. We have to remember that just because something has an origin, when it's been adopted for a particular purpose by Christians to do something else, then the meaning of the symbol now has changed.
Yes.
Like the influence of Christianity has transformed the meaning of this thing that once was used for this. If I'm no longer, like, if I have a Christmas tree,
mm-hmm.
then, and I'm putting it up as a celebration of the birth of Christ, to
mm-hmm.
decorate my home and to make a space for Jesus in my house, I'm no longer using the Christmas tree for that maybe more ancient symbol
mm-hmm.
or reason.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing it for this reason,
right?
Influenced by my faith in Jesus Christ.
Right.
That's what this is all about. If that's the case, then the old meaning of this symbol has no power
mm-hmm.
and can't.
Would it be similar to how like sacraments, for example, how like they are different once, like water is not the same once it's exercised. It's now holy water.
Mm-hmm.
So this active participation in baptizing like creation or the good in culture, it's amazing how it happens, not just like, okay, on feast day, so to speak, but in the natural as well. So
there's the reality that good things can be used for evil purposes.
Yes.
Right. But then there's also the fact that there's a limit to what we can actually do, or to what is possible. So take the Latin language as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Latin existed before Christianity. As a language, Latin was already in use in the Roman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
Latin was a language that developed by human beings. And guess what? The Latin language was used in pagan temple sacrifice.
Yeah.
They were using that language.
That's a good point.
Right? But if they were using that language for their purpose, because it was a language that was also in use for everything. Other everyday purposes.
Law, communication.
Yeah. So too, it became a language that the church used.
Mm-hmm. Because it's common language.
Right. There are people who speak English who use English for nefarious purposes.
Mm.
But are there Christians who are worshiping God using the English language? Yup. Guess what? That happens in every single language.
Yeah.
People use their language sometimes. Some people choose to use that language for reasons that are less than holy.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that trying to use that language in a way that praises God is unholy because there are some who use it or who have used it historically in that way?
So as if that's the default and that's the only way that it can be used. But if that were the case, though, you kind of have to go back to the beginning, to Genesis, where God created everything good. Right. So
the human being having the capacity for speech and for language.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, that's how we're made.
Right.
Same thing like Greg Butara talked about this on his podcast recently, but he talked about yoga. And there's people who have serious problems with yoga. And I think some of those problems are very well founded,
mm-hmm.
right? Because there are spiritual principles involved in yoga that are very contrary to the gospel, very contrary to a life lived with Christ.
Right.
This is simply a fact. There are spiritual principles that are attached to yoga that are very, very dangerous for a Christian,
mm-hmm.
and we shouldn't participate in that way.
Mm-hmm.
However, the exercises and everything that are used, for some people say that some of those exercises are intrinsically evil. That's a really difficult thing to say, that the body
moving in a
doing
particular
things
way
that it can do, because the body is capable of I mean, my body's not capable of stretching and bending in certain ways, but like theoretically the human body is capable of these things. And How are we created? We're created in the image and likeness of God, and we're created good. This body is created good.
Yes.
We are touched by original sin and concupiscence and all the effects of that, but the body is still good. And so to say that there's a certain posture or position that is inherently evil doesn't make sense, because that actually means to reject the goodness of the body.
Yeah, that's a good
Right?
point.
And so we can't actually say that,
Right.
but we can urge the note of caution
Right.
about certain practices. So again, all of this comes into like, let's just take the step back and think about this very reasonably and rationally, that there are some things here that are definitely dangerous and inimical to the faith.
Yes.
And to being a good Christian, to walking with God, there are some things that are going to be obstacles to that. We need to be very cautious of them. Anything having to do with demonic is dangerous, and we should avoid it.
Right.
Right. But even then, right, things having to do with the demonic are dangerous, and we should avoid them. Even the way that I said that, I said it the wrong way. So if there's a book by an exorcist,
oh gosh, yeah,
right,
like the lady, like
it's worthwhile for me to read that and to know something about the exorcist's experience and what is it to do spiritual warfare. Again, like even saying, because it's about the demonic, we have to be careful. Well, yeah, we have to be careful, but that doesn't mean that I should avoid learning and growing in my understanding, because actually that helps me to know better what the enemy is up to.
Right.
This is why the Screwtape Letters is such a great book, because the Screwtape Letters, C.S. Lewis took a huge step and basically imagined himself, not really himself, but like imagined the inner workings of the mind of a demon.
Yeah.
That's huge.
It's incredible.
And not for nothing, but he's pretty spot on when you look at the temptations that he's talking about. And he's really only talking about temptation.
Yeah.
So he's more getting into the idea of just a temptation to sin, not so much possession.
No, he's not.
Or demonic oppression or anything like that. No. And as an Anglican, I don't know that Lewis would have had the same understanding of the way that spiritual warfare works that we might have as Catholics, but still, he's getting into like, here's how a demon typically tempts you. Here's what this might look like. Here's the type of sin that Satan likes most often to make look really, really attractive.
And it's ordinary.
It's a lot of ordinary stuff.
And that's the thing. It's like, this thing is the ordinary ways in which you get pulled into cooperating with evil. That's all it is.
So recognizing that there are these realities, that these things are present, is actually a super important thing for Christians and Catholics to do. We need to be aware of that. At the same time, we can't let ourselves get so caught up in all this that we're constantly fearful, because then actually the more fearful we are of this, or the more hesitant we are, the more we're kind of denying ourselves the opportunity to trust God's goodness and God's presence.
Right.
Now, even as I say that, though, we've got to add the caveat. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be careful.
Right, cautious.
Nor does it mean that it's bad to want to avoid certain things. Like if somebody doesn't want to observe Halloween, fine. Like I'm okay with that. I really don't mind. I've seen what Halloween can be in some places. Like I've told you this story before. I think I had a baptism in New York City several years back, and it was Halloween weekend.
And someone came up to you?
No. So I got on, I took the train into the city, and then the subway to the church where the baptism was, did the baptism, made a little celebration with the family at their apartment around the corner. And then I walked back to the subway and realized it was getting to be nighttime, and it's Halloween weekend. It wasn't Halloween yet.
Right.
It was like the weekend of Halloween. Right. So I think it was a Friday or a Saturday. And so all these people are coming out to go to parties. They're all in costumes.
Oh yeah.
So there I am on the subway in a priest costume, because that's what I wear all the time. And I'm looking at all these people who are wearing their different costumes and everything, but I saw some really vulgar religious costumes.
Yeah.
People getting on the train and things that were actually really offensive.
Yeah.
Like it was really offensive to see them dressed that way. And I don't think they didn't realize that I was an actual priest.
Yeah.
I just thought I was a dude in a costume because everybody else was wearing a costume. But it was kind of an awkward moment. And I kind of felt that pressure, like that spiritual pressure. It's like, I'm not saying that everything that happens on Halloween is a good thing.
Agreed.
And I'm not saying that we should wave the Halloween flag as this is the greatest thing in the world.
Right.
But if we're going to like celebrate Halloween, do it as All Saints Day. Do it as an All Hallows Eve. Dress as a saint, dress as an angel, do something that reminds you of sanctifying the day and chasing away the darkness and the evil and everything.
Right.
Or if you don't want to dress up as a saint, dress up as something that's neutral, like
a potato.
A potato. Why not? Dress up as Mr. Potato Head, a My Little Pony, any of the Hasbro toys, really, except for the Ouija board, which is actually a Hasbro toy now
true.
too. You know,
right.
Or Mattel. I'm not sure which it is, but either way,
Either one.
Whatever. Like,
they're selling it everywhere.
You know, if you dress up as a football player, a baseball player, like fine, go for it. I'm going to be a race car. Great, do it. Like, that's. I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm on board with that stuff.
Right.
And I dressed up as Superman, like every chance I got when I was a kid to be for Halloween. Like that was my thing. I loved it. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing inherently evil in that.
What about trick or treating?
I don't really have an issue with trick or treating either. Again, what's the intention behind trick or treating? Now, again, we might look and say, well, the origins are this. Yeah, but is that why people are doing it today?
No.
The fact of the matter is
kids want candy.
That cultures and the reasons for doing things change over time.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you sneeze and somebody says, God bless you. Do you know why they say God bless you?
Because your soul was going to leave your body.
That, and also the fear that it meant that you had the plague and you were about to die.
That too.
Right? When you sneeze, do I think that you have the plague? No, I no longer think that you have the plague. It has become a polite response. My motivation for saying God bless you is because I was taught to do that when somebody sneezes when I was a little child. I wasn't taught any of the origin story behind it. So I didn't know any of that origin. So can I possibly...
Your intention is to bless somebody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a perfectly fine and normal intention, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I went trick-or-treating. Did I know anything about the pagan origins of Halloween or the way that trick-or-treating developed as a I don't remember even like all of that stuff. Did I have any sense of this being somehow rooted in evil? No.
Yeah.
No. And so am I doing something that's inherently evil in and of itself because it's a pagan ritual practice?
No.
No. Again, now let's add the caveat.
Right.
Does the devil like to work through indifference?
Yes.
And get at us through those places where we think, oh, it's perfectly harmless and it's fine and I don't have to have my guard up or anything. Yep, that can happen too. So again,
especially as New Age spiritualism is on the rise,
you
know, what if like people start giving up? Here's your crystal. Here's this. Like it's just. I mean, that's also another reality is Christianity, unfortunately, is declining in numbers. So is this New Age spiritualism, and so there is something to be said about that as well. But still, at the end of the day, is how are we bringing the gospel into the world and not hiding from the world?
Right. And then there's also the reminder of what are the practices that we have to protect us from these kinds of things. Right. There's a reason that we say grace before we eat a meal. It's both to give thanks to God for the blessing of a meal. Thank you, Lord, that you've given us this food. Really appreciate it.
So grateful that it wasn't
Rub-a-dub-dub,
poisoned.
thanks for the grub, yay God. You know, like we bless the meal as
can you say that the next time you do a food blessing? Rub-a-dub-dub, thanks for the grub.
You've never heard that?
No.
Oh my goodness.
There's another one that I can't remember. Good God, something, let us eat. Please. Oh, yeah. What is it?
It's like, good God, let's eat.
Oh, that's it.
There's something not good.
There was something in the middle.
Yeah. In any case, there's a reason that we bless food. It's first of all to give thanks to God for the gift of a meal, for the gift of what he has provided for us. But in a secondary way, we also bless the food so that should anybody have done anything to our food, any of that power might be removed by God's protecting grace, whether that's spiritual or physical. Right, like that he would protect us from any evil that might have been spoken over this food, but that he would also protect us from anything evil put into the food, like poison or something. We're like asking God's protection. So saying grace is a very actually helpful thing, and I think a really good thing.
So then, how do you take like the way that American Catholics celebrate Halloween or All Hallows Eve compared to other parts of the world where there isn't like this?
In the United States, Halloween is celebrated in a way that it is not celebrated anywhere else.
Right.
Halloween has like most holidays in the United States become almost entirely commercialized.
For sure.
Right. In like when I lived in Italy, Halloween, if somebody dressed up in a costume, like boys dressed up as a ghost and girls dressed up as a witch, and that was the full extent of it.
Isn't there like a bruja, like a day of a witch in Italy?
That's a different thing.
That's in January or something?
No, so it's connected to Epiphany, actually.
Yes, that's what it is. What is that?
The Befana, La Befana.
Yes.
So the Befana is the story, the tradition goes that the three wise men were on their way to look for the Christ child, and so they came to the Befana, who was like a witch, a medicine woman, something like that. And they came to her and asked for her guidance to know where to go. And she asked them to wait for her so they could come, and they didn't wait. And so now she goes around searching for them so that she can, like, because she wants to find the Christ child also.
Oh.
So the Befana is like a witch
who wants
like,
to find
like
Jesus.
like the way that Americans would think about a witch, like
right.
the warty nose and the big hat and the
Right.
broomstick and everything. But the Befana is not an evil person.
Okay.
And like in Italian folklore, the Befana is not inherently evil in any way. So there's a big difference there.
Wow.
Yeah. Like,
it's different.
Yeah, we might look at it culturally as Americans and go, that looks like the same kind of, evil stuff that we've seen before. But in
Right.
fact, for the Italians, the Befana is kind of like a silly thing. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. No.
These different traditions like develop in different countries.
Yeah.
Ours is almost entirely secular, almost entirely commercialized.
Right.
And there is a massive industry around making Halloween costumes. And increasingly, what do we see? Like the Halloween costumes are more and more vulgar.
Yeah, they're very gory. I walked into Party City the other day.
Gory or
very
pornographic.
Yeah, pretty much. Literally.
Like that's kind of the way that Halloween has gone for us.
Yeah.
Again, which tells you there could for sure be evil influences that are present.
Yes.
In that. But certainly not the kinds of things that like we have to give into. We have the ability to observe Halloween as All Hallows Eve. We have the ability to try to recover something of actually how this all developed and what this all really looked like or could look like.
Right.
We have the possibility to dream of something being different. And I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to change something that we see as broken. So rather than running away and hiding, or refusing to participate in certain things, I would rather say, let's try to influence something. If it is something that you feel that you can't participate in, then I don't think there's anything wrong with opting out. I don't have any issue with somebody saying, I don't want to dress up in a Halloween costume. I don't want to go to a Halloween party. I don't want to watch a horror movie. I also don't want to watch a horror movie.
I don't want to watch a horror movie.
So I'm good with it. It doesn't bother me at all.
No.
Something that I have been disturbed by is when you've seen people who are like encouraging people to wear whatever their Halloween costume is to church, to mass. There have been some pretty infamous videos of mass being celebrated while people are dressed in whatever costume they can come up with, including devil horns.
No way.
Yeah, and it's super inappropriate. It's not the right way to approach the holy sacrifice of the mass.
No, it is not.
But I'll tell you what, if a kid wants to dress up as a priest for Halloween,
oh heck yeah,
I'm not going to stand in his way. I think that's awesome.
You want to be a friar? For sure, we got you.
Let's do it. I think that's great.
Well, do you know what you're dressing up as for trunk or treat?
Well, so I know I said gory is something that we might want to avoid, and
You're gonna dress up as a martyr? Yeah,
I'm gonna dress up as Isaac Jogues.
Isn't the one who got his head scalped?
Yeah, so we celebrate Isaac Jogues this week. Isaac Jogues was martyred by the
Mohawk? No.
Iroquois. The Iroquois, I believe the Iroquois, in upstate New York, and also had his fingers, his
right, because
index fingers and his thumbs chewed off by weasels. They stuck his hand in a cage and fed his hands to weasels. Yeah.
Didn't he leave and then come back?
Yeah. So he left. He was rescued from the Iroquois and sent back to France. And he went to the Pope and asked for permission to continue celebrating Mass. The Pope embraced him and called him a living martyr because of the tortures that he had endured already. Yeah. And he basically fought his way back to the New World, got back on a boat, came over, went straight back to the very tribes that he had been trying to evangelize before and continued proclaiming the gospel to them.
Right.
And he was once again captive and then eventually tomahawked to death.
What a way
to
go.
But it's really interesting because if you look at like those Jesuit martyrs and those missionaries who came, they wrote the Iroquois language.
No way.
So the language was already spoken, but they had no writing. And so these guys developed the alphabet for them.
Wow.
And developed, and the same thing go out west in like the Navajo. And any of the written languages for a lot of the tribes, the languages were written by the missionaries who went to them and met them.
Wow.
And the Jesuits in particular were really good at going and learning the language, writing it down, and then sending the language back. So
That's
in the form of like
incredible.
dictionaries and lexicons and everything, they would send it back. And
Yeah.
so teach the grammar and the accent and the speaking of the language, so that
Right.
when somebody arrived as a missionary, they might already have at least some semblance of the language.
Wow.
But they would go and they would just go to these places, and keep in mind, totally unknown.
Right.
Having absolutely no idea where they were going or who these people were, they would go to them and communicate through sign language,
Mm-hmm.
and then just stay with them until they learned the language.
I mean, even to the point about like going in and baptizing stuff, like these missionaries would go into cultures that were so foreign to them, seeking to bring the gospel, but using what they knew, what they had, in order to still communicate Jesus to them.
Yeah.
Like in a way that they would understand, in a way that they would receive. So essentially, God is good. We are good, but people have distorted good for evil purposes. So we need to be cautious of that. But also at the end of the day, it's Jesus who has the victory over death and over evil. You know, evil is not equal to God. God is God. God is sovereign. He is omnipotent. And that is the peace that God is offering to us. I guess even when we do look at evil in the world and the things that are happening, is there's something there is, okay, like, I mean, it is really disturbing to hear about all the stuff that is happening, you know, over in Israel and Palestine and other parts of the world that is also suffering. So in one way, it's the gospel is still called to enter into those places. And at the same time, for the Christian, is the hope that Jesus is still victorious, even in the face of like the greatest atrocities.
Yeah, exactly. Another piece of this is, so there's the preparation to go into difficult situations. So like you're talking about your friend, like I gotta pray my rosary before I watch this. Yeah, if that's what you need, if that's the kind of preparation that you need to feel like spiritually prepared to enter into something that might be challenging or difficult, then do it.
Yeah.
There's a reason that, for example, at some of the big conferences, when somebody's giving a talk, they also ask people to pray for them at the time that they're giving the talk.
Exactly.
Please pray for me, because I know that this is a time when I'm likely to be under attack, or when I'm likely to be, you know, maybe tempted or struggling or something.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with asking for prayer. There's nothing wrong with praying in preparation for things. And there's also nothing wrong with praying after the fact.
Right.
So what you'll often find, when I went to the JP2 Healing Center retreat for priests a couple years ago, after some of the exercises, some of the discussions that we'd have, we would also pray like a prayer of protection and cleansing, of like asking God to take from us anything that we might have taken on in that moment. You know, kind of putting ourselves in different places, imagining different things to say like, all right, Lord, take this, anything that I may be holding on to after this exercise, or any wrong sense of my own identity, I offer it to you. Lord, protect us from any evil that we've unknowingly exposed ourselves to, if that happened. And also, Lord, help us to leave behind any wounds that we've uncovered, and let them be healed. And so it was actually this really beautiful exercise of, at the end of something that could have been potentially very challenging, to just invite God into that moment again, to like give us his healing. So that's the other thing that we can do. And this is the thing that I think we have to keep so carefully in mind. There's nothing out there that's so threatening that we can't turn to the Lord with confidence that he's going to have the victory.
That's how the martyrs entered into this thing.
Exactly.
If the most horrific thing is happening to them, and yet they walked in with such confidence.
Right. We don't have to be afraid of all that extra stuff that's out there.
Right.
It doesn't mean we should go looking for it.
No, of course.
Like, come at me, devil. No.
Yeah.
No. That's not it at all.
I mean, even the Latin Patriarch right now, and him requesting.
Latin Patriarch is doing something super courageous right now.
Super heroic.
Folks, just in case you don't know, the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, Cardinal Pier Battista Pizzaballa.
I know, what a baller last name.
He has the greatest name in the entire College of Cardinals.
Oh, really?
This is like
truly
the greatest name.
He's a pizza baller.
Yeah. Pierre Battista Pizzaballa, and like it's just a
Yeah.
fantastic name. I
Mhm.
think the only one who ever could hold a candle to that was Cardinal Jaime Sin of Manila in the Philippines.
Jaime
Sin.
Sin.
His name was.
His last name was Sin.
His name was Cardinal Sin.
Oh, what's his greatest virtue? His
Exactly.
cardinal virtue.
So Cardinal Sin.
Oh my gosh.
You want a cool story though? So Cardinal Sin was sent to China to speak with the Chinese government, and they trotted out Bishop Ignatius Kung. So Bishop Kung was imprisoned by the Chinese government, by the communists, for refusing to swear allegiance to the communists.
Amen, man.
And so he was put in prison, and he was kept in prison for over 20 years.
Oh.
Solitary confinement for most of that. And there's a question as to whether or not Bishop Kung had lost his faith, if he was still even alive. And so Cardinal Sin was sent as an envoy to China to find out what was going on, and to find out, like, is this bishop, like, is he alive? Is he still Catholic? What's happened?
Right.
And so he went to see him, and they weren't allowed to actually speak to each other face to face. They were kept at opposite ends of a very big table. And so Cardinal Sin, recognizing what they were doing, that they were very deliberately preventing him from having direct contact with Bishop Kung, Cardinal Sin proposed to the table. He said that he thought it would be nice if they could sing something. And so he stood up and he sang, I think he sang the Salve Regina. Right. So he chanted the Salve Regina in Latin, and then he sat down, and Bishop Kung stood up at the other end of the table and chanted Tu es Petrus. So the Tu es Petrus is, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. What he was doing was he was communicating to the Pope's representative, Cardinal Sin, I am still in union with the Pope. I have maintained this union with the Pope.
Oh my gosh.
And some of the Chinese Catholic Patriotic Association bishops who were there and who understood Latin knew what he was doing, and they warned the communists what was happening, so they trotted him back into prison and kept him there. John Paul II then made Bishop Kung a cardinal in pectore, and this is where we get the name Cardinal Kung, because Bishop Ignatius Kung was made a cardinal in secret until he could finally be released. When his release was secured, you know where Cardinal Kung went?
Stanford, Connecticut.
Stanford, Connecticut, baby.
Yep. That's to live out the rest of his days.
Yeah. So you have this Cardinal Sin connect. Anyway, so Cardinal Pier Battista Pizzaballa has offered himself in exchange for the hostages of Hamas. Yeah. So he's offering, now I don't know if Hamas is going to take him up on the offer.
It's just a powerful thing.
But it's a very powerful witness that he's saying, like, send the hostages back to their families, and I'll go in their place. Like, he's willing to literally put his life on line. And not for nothing, he just got the red hat as a cardinal.
He did.
So, but you know what the red hat is all about. It's about being willing to shed your blood for the sake of the gospel.
Yeah.
No greater love has a man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends.
Oh, I'm crying. This is beautiful.
I mean, how powerful is that story?
It's so beautiful.
Right? So this guy being willing to do that is standing and witnessing in the face of the power of evil, and it is beautiful.
I mean, that blows my mind, because then how many cardinals are actually at that? Oh, we're going into church politics. We don't have to do that. How many of them are actually?
I mean, I don't want to judge, but I don't think
a lot. I mean, there's.
I don't think that the big three in the United States are. I can't imagine them doing that. They don't really seem to believe in the gospel.
Yeah. That's powerful. The red means I'm willing to shed my blood for the gospel. Wow.
And he's putting it out there.
Wow.
And
wow.
Whether or not they take him up on it, if anything happens as a result of that, I think you have to admire that, because that takes a great deal of courage.
It does.
It's powerful. And we need witnesses like that.
I mean, that's kind of, it's what it is in the face of evil.
Yeah.
Martyrs.
Now, we don't like to make comparisons, right?
Right.
Because everybody's story is kind of their own, and we have to recognize and reverence the unique experience of each individual.
Yeah, everybody's martyrdom is different.
Right. And so the like, to hold in reverence what Cardinal Pizzaballa is willing to do, which is very, very powerful. But then we could also, like, again, it's not the right thing to do, but we could make the comparison, like, and we're worried about trick-or-treating.
Oof.
Now, again, That's, I don't mean that as a way of minimizing anything, but like,
Yeah.
okay, if we're going to get all up in arms about trick-or-treating,
Right.
we better have a leg to stand on with that.
Yeah.
Right. So that it actually is something serious enough for us to be concerned about.
Mm-hmm.
He's willing to lay down his life in exchange for hostages, to offer himself.
Mm-hmm.
He's literally putting his blood on the line.
Yeah, he is.
Okay. Now there's something very serious about that. Is this of the same level? And I know that spiritual warfare is a real thing. I believe in it. I know that the powers of darkness exist, in the sense of
Right.
like they're attacking us. I know that people have dealt with demonic possession. I don't take anything away from
Yeah, not to minimize that either.
But man, somebody innocently doing something, having no context or no conception of it being evil, having no evil intent,
right,
as they do it,
it's not going to lead them
it's not
to
the same. But they're also, it's not going to lead them further into that darkness.
Right.
Especially knowing what we know about like our ability to pray for protection and to enter into the spiritual lists, and so engage. And this is what we're really called to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How do you want to wrap this up?
That's a great question.
A lot was said.
We said many words.
We said many words.
Yes. In that way, we're just like the Synod on Synodality. We've said a lot of words, and some of them might be useful.
Some of it, most of it, might not.
There's a good chance.
I saw this video that said like, "Oh, you're worried about the Synod on Synodality? Do you remember the one from like 20 years ago? Neither did I. Don't worry about it."
Exactly. But hey, I hope that we got to talk about the thing that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, we did. And it was like,
do you feel seen, known, and loved?
That's so annoying.
Do you feel appreciated and reverenced?
I'm getting annoyed.
Do you feel valued? Thanks, Paula.
You're welcome, Father Sam. Thank you for indulging me on the topic.
You are indulged. This is Where I Like the Lamb. I'm Father Sam Pachuba.
I'm Paula Pena.
God bless you.